Hello and welcome to another tutorial. This is HitPause from Magic Stone Studios, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a fireball inside a 3ds Max using FumeFX, how to get that out of here into UDK for use in a particle system to make an explosion. So let's get started. First thing we need to do is create a FumeFX object. Just click this here and we'll hold control and we'll drag out from the center. Now let's go ahead and make it 150 by 150 by, let's just say 150 for now because we don't really know how big we want to make it yet. And let's go ahead and zero it out. I just want to quickly go over our units. So if we go to our units setup, I am using metric. 1 unit equals 1 meter. Okay, I think this is pretty standard. Generic would be basically the same thing. It doesn't really matter, so I'll just keep it at generic. And the next thing we need to do is create a FumeFX source, and that is under helpers. And we will use a simple source here. Just drag that out and move it up. Let's zero out the X and Y. And really the height doesn't matter, so we'll put it at 20. We just don't want it to be partially through the bottom there. It'll cut off. Okay, once we've got that, let's come to our modifier panel and hit this button here to open up the FumeFX UI. Just and drag that down into the scene. And the very first thing we want to do is we want to change our paths, because FumeFX writes cache files, and these cache files can actually be quite huge. So you can see I've done a couple of tests here. Let's just make a new folder and we'll call this YouTube Fireball. And we'll put that in there and just hit save. We may or may not use wavelet. Might as well give it a try. We're probably not going to use retimer, but we'll go ahead and give it a home anyway, just in case. Okay. These files can be pretty huge, so pick a place on your hard drive that has a lot of space. Don't fill up your OS drive and then start running slow here. Okay. Let's add our object source, because we need to associate that with the FumeFX system. And once we've done that, that's all we need to do to get a basic preview of some fire here. So if I zoom in, you can see we've got our simulation going. And I'll just let that go. And then when you hit play, you can see your fire, and at this point we can actually render it, and you can see our fire here. It's not great, it's nothing really spectacular. What we want is a fireball, and because this is going to be used in an explosion inside a UDK, we're going to be using the particle system inside of there, which means all of the movement, scaling, fading, all of that's going to be controlled in the cascade, not inside of here. So what we need to do is basically do what we can to remove most of the dynamics. My version of FumeFX is 3.0.1, and this is running in Max 2012. Okay, so let's see. The first thing we want to do is pretty much get rid of that smoke. Now you can do that here under Object Source, and we can see that our smoke is being set to 2. Let's just zero that out and give it another sim. Actually, let's check our simulation quality here. You can see that I'm rendering at a 50 by 50 grid. If you look over here, you can see that this is the density of our voxels. The lower this number, the higher this goes, and the better your simulation looks. However, the longer it takes to simulate, and this scales up pretty exponentially, so if you go too crazy, you are looking at a long simulation, and it can actually go up to a few days, like 40 hours if you don't have a good enough system. So keep it reasonable. We're not going for an insane amount of quality here, but we do want it to look nice. Okay, so The other thing we're going to do is when we're done, we are going to be taking these frames out of Max and putting them into Photoshop and setting them up as a texture atlas, which is basically going to be like a flipbook texture. We won't be using flipbook, we'll be using sub-UV, but it will basically just be the frames. So given that, we don't really want to have to process 100 frames or anything, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a 32 frame animation. So I'm going to set my end time here to 32, and I'm going to change my corresponding settings here. We'll want it to only sim from 0 to 32, and we also want the playback to only go to frame 32. So let's go ahead and resim this. You can see that the smoke has been removed because I zeroed that out. My sim is going a little bit slower. We're looking at about 0.6, 0.7, roughly a second. One thing to note, I'm going to start spinning the viewport here, and you can see that my last frame was 6 seconds. So it does take a little bit of processing to actually sim and dolly the viewport or pan it or whatever. So keep that in mind and avoid playing with it while it's actually simming. Okay, let's try to work on our settings. Because this is a fireball and I'm going to be moving it around in UDK, I don't really want this, how it's going up like that. I don't want a flame look, I want a fireball look. So what we're going to do is come to the sim, and I am first going to knock out the gravity. Now if I resim that, you'll see that it's just going to kind of expand. It is going to move a little bit up. Let's come in, zoom a little bit closer here. Okay, now that is pretty much a fireball, but it's not doing a whole lot. It's not very interesting, and it is still moving up. Now the reason it's moving up is because our source has some velocity. Now if I, let's say, change this to 10 and resim, you'll see it's going to rise a little bit more, but not really a whole lot. Let's change our directional to 10 and resim, and now you can see that we've poofed it up. The other thing you'll notice is that I'm constantly generating fire throughout the entire life cycle of this, and that is not something that I want to do. Now the thing about FumeFX is that a lot of the cool rolling and swirling of the fire does actually come from motion. So we don't want to knock out the motion entirely. What we basically want to do, this would be a little hard to show. Let me stop dollying the viewport so it moves here. You can see that we're looking at 3 seconds. That last frame was 7 seconds. That was while I was rotating the camera. So again, try not to do that. I'll be doing that for this purpose, for the purposes of the tutorial, but while you're actually simming, especially when you're going high res, just go hands free. Just go watch a movie or something while it's going on. Okay, you can see this is almost done. This is obviously not what we want, but I do like to let them sim all the way through. Even though this isn't what we want, it does look actually kind of cool. And last frame. And then if I hit play, just kind of a little bit of a mushrooming going on there and some swirling at the end. It's cool. Now what we can do is, even though we don't want the motion, we can actually follow it with our camera. I'm just doing this by hand, and remove that motion from there, but still get that cool swirling effect. And that's what we're actually going to try to do, but we need to dial our sim down first. Now 10, I don't really want 10. I want maybe 3. And also, while we're working here, if you go to sim, quality at 5, I can knock that to 2, and the iterations has a pretty big impact on the simulation time. You can see that that's going quite a bit faster, gets to the end. And I'm still using the same spacing, but you also notice that I got a wildly different sim, even though, well, let's see, let's give this a test. I'm not 100% familiar with FumeFX, just to be honest with you. Okay, it's roughly the same thing, but this definitely goes quite a bit faster than the first one. We were looking at 3 seconds or so a frame, and now we're less than 1 second. So I don't need to keep playing that. I'm not going to keep that at all. So again, let's go maybe about 5 for the gravity. Alright. Let's give it a little more noise. Vorticity is kind of the swirling factor. If I pop that up to 1, you can see I get more tendrils in my flame. Okay, it's kind of the tendriling would be your vorticity, and I don't really want a whole lot of that, but I do want some noise. Let's also, if we do velocity dampening of 1, it's pretty much not going to go anywhere, and we definitely don't want that. So, but we can slow it down just a little bit with a 0.1, and that'll help keep things just a little bit more clustered. The voxels won't travel as far and won't separate as much. We also want to have some turbulence in here. Now, I want to have more detail, and I want it to be very noisy. I just want it to break up the edges a little bit. I don't want to make a big ol' crazy whooshy swirl. And you'll see that if I say a scale of 50 and a detail of 1 when I sim this, you can see these long wavy things. I don't want that. So I'm gonna go about 5, about 2, and now I need to take care of something real quick, and that is to knock out the amount of fire that it generates after the fact, because you can see that my source remains, and I don't want that. So we need to animate this. Every one of these spinners is animatable. Any one of these radial checkboxes and drop down windows, those are not. Okay, so we can auto key, and let's just go to, say, I don't know, let's say frame 10, and we'll knock that out. Okay, let's turn off auto key, and now you'll see after frame 10 the fire disappears. Now this is pretty abrupt. You can see it kind of comes from on to off. There's not a lot else really going on. So let's go back and get some actual noise in there. Let's try 0.5, and that broke it up pretty nicely. Okay, but it pretty much disappears too fast. Okay, it's gone way too soon. So the way to fix that would be its burn rate, and the burn rate is how fast basically the fire burns and burns out. So if we set this to like 0.1, you'll see that the fire stays around for quite a while. Okay, even all the way to the end of my sim. I don't necessarily want that either. You can also see that it's still a pretty abrupt dropout right here. So what I can do is extend how long the fire burns. Now you'll notice that I don't have a keyframe here, even though if I come over here to the object source and I drag this, you can see that at frame 10 I have a keyframe by the little red brackets around the spinner. But I don't have a keyframe here. What this is here, object source, is just basically like a floating link to this FFX simple source, which is this object here. If I click this object, you see I got my key here. So now I can actually extend that and highlight this, and now the fire should burn out a little bit more gradually. Now let's try to do just one frame of flame. Let's see what we get. So basically the fire is on in the beginning and it's off instantaneously. Now we can actually get rid of this frame, but that's probably a little too short, so let's go frame 3. It's not too bad, but I don't think our fireball is expanding enough. And there's a simple setting for that. Expansion. Go ahead. And I don't think we have enough fire yet for the expansion to actually take hold. So if we go 50, it should get pretty big. And it's really not doing a whole lot. Not going to sim any smoke yet. I don't mind my fireball, especially considering that if I look at this from the top, you can get something kind of unique. Let's go ahead and up our sim quality just a little bit. Try that. I don't think that's going to do a whole lot. Still going to ring out like that. I don't really want to ring, so I'll go ahead and put that back down. Let's say 50. See, I'm using about 90 megs. Let's go for about 150. Let's play that. Let's go ahead and extend this. And I think what I want to do is actually kill some of this velocity damping. So I get a little bit more expansion going on. And I need to up my burn rate. I want my fire to be gone by the end of the frame. So let's get our burn rate up to, let's say, about 3. And that's going to give us a lot more expansion. And you can see that now I've got way too much expansion. It's just going to blow out to the edge of the cube. So let's change that to about 3. I feel my noise is a little too much, a little wavy. So let's do that to 0.1. Okay, so you can see that this is kind of a balancing act. You can see if I go to my object source here that I'm generating temperature. My temperature that I'm generating is pretty much 300 degrees. And that once the fuel hits 100 degrees, it ignites. Now let's see what happens if we turn that to 1. I don't know if we're going to get a whole lot of difference. Okay. I also think that I need to get some object velocity in there. Let's go about 0.5. Let's change the directional to about 0.65. We'll try that. And let's actually give it a little more turbulence. It's half the scale. And we want it to cycle every 1 frame. You can see that that does a little bit better to get rid of some of that ringing, but not entirely. Burn rate, we need to go up again. Oops, 1, 0, 10. Get that fire out of here before the frame ends. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Let's try 20. made a square because it basically hit the edge of the my box. Okay, you can see that that's what happens when it gets to the edge of the box. So we're probably expanding a little too much. There we go. I think we're finally at something that I like. Whether or not you like it is a completely different story. But that's not bad. You can see my fire is gone by frame 32. By actually frame 21, it's gone. But it's a nice gradual destruction of the fire over that time. So let's extend that a little bit by making our burn rate about 10. Almost perfect. 15. Okay. Let's assume we're pretty happy with that. The thing is we can be here all day and every result will look good in here, but whether or not it's going to be something that we want to use in UDK is a completely different story, and we kind of need to see it there. And this can go on forever, and you can never be happy, or you can be happy with every single change you make. It's really tough to kind of call a stopping point in FumeFX, and because of my slight lack of experience here, I can't really give you any advice in terms of that. Just keep playing with everything. The main things being the fuel here and how much noise you have and whatnot. So the other thing I want to do is just give this a try. Let's try knocking out our turbulence at frame 10 and see what we get. Nah, don't like that. Keep the turbulence. Let's also add a little bit of gravity, even though we're pretty much looking at it from the top. We could look at it from the side now because we don't have a lot of movement. So playing it slow. You got to imagine that this is going to play relatively slow in the particle system. But we don't really have any kind of poofing anymore. And it's not too shabby. The other thing we can do, just for giggles, and we'll see if this does anything. Let's see, we've got a diameter of 24. Let's try 10 and auto key to 25. And let's give that a try. Now with a smaller diameter, we're actually going to probably get, it's going to be much shorter because there was less area to generate fuel. So given that, let's go ahead and drop our burn rate back down. And I don't think that that's really enough. Let's boost our ignition temperature. That should actually knock the fire out a little bit quicker too. But if we give it more expansion, that might compensate. It does a little bit. Let's put a little bit higher variation in our burn rate. Let's go to 10. Okay, the higher the burn rate, the more fire you actually are going to get. So now given that, we need to lower back our expansion. You can see what a balance everything is. You raise one thing, you need to lower the other. Let's go half of that. Okay, that's kind of a weird motion. Makes almost a bat symbol at some point there, like a battering. Let's get that pop there that I don't like. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this 20 so it only grows a little bit. Now we're probably going to have to redial all our settings because we're going to end up hitting the cube again. And we do. So let's come off of auto key. Expansion. Let's go back to 3.5. And our burn rate, let's go 12.5. Try to get the fire out of here by the end. Almost. Ignition temperature, we can raise that. That will knock the fire out a little bit sooner too. Still not quite. Let's try 50, see what we get. I'm wondering if that will actually increase the duration of the fire. Oh, real close. 100. So as the fuel cools, the fire will no longer be ignited. And let's just go ahead and go to 15 here. That should probably do it. It's a little heavy. Let's try 13.5, one more than what we had before it was ending right at frame 32. I'm pretty sure at frame 33 it would have been gone. There we go. Frame 30, it's there. 31's gone. Okay. We don't have any pop. A nice gradual shift away. Okay, let's say we're happy with that. Now let's just scroll around it. We are a little cubic though. So what we're going to do there, in order to counter that, is we're going to give ourselves a little bit more fire, and we can do that. I'm going to make a copy here, and I'm going to change the diameter to like 17, and what I'm going to do is actually point this in instead of out like that. Actually, let me undo that really quick. These littler ones here, I want to be instances so I can control all their settings at once. Okay, now we need to add these to our simulation, so let's just pick that one and that one. Now let's see what we get. Okay, they're definitely too separated. Our fire should still burn out at the right time, and it does. And let's see. Obviously, we don't want that. It looks like close encounters of the third kind. So you can see how they join, how this pushes the other flame there. So let's just move them in. Give that a try. Seems a little better. A little bit more of an irregular shape. Not a lot of noise going on, but keep in mind we are at a low res sim here, and that's a big factor, a big factor. In fact, if I go high res, I might end up with too much flame. So just actually quality 5, iterations of 200, not 2000, and let's drop this down to about 300. Actually, let's go 500. We should get about a 250 grid, roughly somewhere around there, and we'll sim that. That's not going to be that slow. You can see I'm looking at still about a second a frame. I mean, it's fast enough for me to, not have to stop the recording and come back and show the results. It will get slower as the sim goes on, but it can be a little dangerous because we may not lose our fire by the time that we need here. And it's getting there. Looking at 2 seconds, 2.5 now. Wow, we hit it right on the mark. So our settings are still good. It's good to do that test at a higher res just to see if your burnout times. Because the most important thing for us in this simulation is our timing, not necessarily, well, I mean, definitely the look, but our timing is key. We have to have these things go away. And we can find an angle where this looks less cubic. It looks pretty cubic right there. I mean, I can even see the 3 axes. But if we come from like the corner or so, and we're not hitting the edge of the sim, we can double check that. Let's go ahead and just reduce this by higher and check how much fuel we're generating. You can see these blue dots. Let's put on the fire. You can see that we are ending up a little cubic here, which we need to fix because we don't want a cube. So some of that, I believe, can be possibly worked here, and also the amount of actually we can also drop our sim back down here. Let's go about 200. Let's work about half res. Let's see if we can't knock out that cubic look. It's not totally doing it. Still quite cubic. But our flame is still getting knocked out at the right moment. I'm not real sure why it's becoming a cube, considering that I have circular sources. It's a little strange. However, we are hitting the bottom, and that could be driving the rest of it. So let's move this up. Let's see if that fixes any of that. Still a little square. Let's increase our sensitivity of our expanding field, because you see this blue square. This is our expanding field. A lot of it could also be because of what we're doing here with the way that the voxels are going to be ending up pushing each other. If you notice, this source pushes up that way, this source pushes up that way, and if you look at the actual flame, you can see that as they're coming together, they're shooting out this way. But why I would end up cubic this way is kind of beyond me. So let's try this. Alright, let's throw a little animation into this guy. Let's create a cube. Standard prims. Box. Okay, it doesn't really matter how big it is. We'll just go 5 by 5 by 5. Let's zero her out. Let's take these guys and we'll link them to it. And go auto key, and we'll spin it around about 180. Doesn't really have to be perfect. Okay, remember we're only generating fire for the first part, so any animation after that's not going to do us any good. And let's just make sure that this cube isn't renderable. And we'll see what we get now. Okay, I did say to not play with the viewport while it's going. I didn't do an awful lot to swirl us around now, did it? Alright, that's still not really working. But it's a little better. So we got a little bit of motion in there. Let's try taking this, making it a little bit bigger. Okay, that gave us, that's kind of broken us. Well, it can be, you know, useful in some situations. I do want a continuous fireball now. It's interesting. So, actually what I'm going to do is get rid of those turds, because everything kind of started to seem to go wrong at that point. Alright, we'll get a little bit more gravity in here. And in the sake of not wanting this to take an eternity, because like I said, you can sit here all day and everything you changes it, and you can just go forever. But I do like how it's burning out at the right moment, so let's go with that. It's still very cubic and it's not hitting the edge, and that is bugging me. But there are angles where it looks a little bit less. Alright, let's actually create some smoke now. And go to our rendering tab and make sure our smoke is checked. Now our fireball should actually make smoke. Now given that, that might actually drastically change the shape. And actually I'm not really seeing a whole lot of smoke, so let's get quite a bit more in there. Let's go 10. Let's be crazy. Okay, actually we need to make sure we're simulating the smoke. That's the problem. There we go. And we got some smoke in there. We do want to be left with a smoke poof. Okay, now if we render this, you see it's all white here, but if you render, keep in mind that it's really not like that, and it's a little tough to work with. I'm gonna lower my scale a little bit more. I still feel like that's a little too wispy, a little less fireball-y. And at this point, I'm actually completely irritated with the cubic fashion of it, how I got this hard edges here. And in the essence, in the spirit of this being a tutorial, I'm going to try to fix that off camera. And when I come back, I'll just say, hey, this is what I fixed. Because like I said, it can take an eternity, and I think it has to do with my balance of ignition, burn rate, and speeds and things like that. So I'm going to pause it, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to fix it. And as you can see, I mean, that's definitely that's a square, and that's upsetting. So let me fix that. Alright, I think I got something a little bit more usable here. If I drag this through, you can see that there's my flame, poofs out, and I ended up with some smoke. Now my smoke isn't perfectly circular, and I'm actually okay with that because we're going to have random rotation going on in our UDK particle system, and this will serve to make some somewhat interesting breakup of the silhouette of the whole thing. So let's go through the settings real quick. Gravity I dropped down to 0.01. The main thing that I did that actually helped was I knocked the time scale up to 3. That has an extremely dramatic effect on the entire simulation. If I put that to 1 and I sim this, you can see that I basically get like nothing. But if I put this up to say like 10, you can see that I get this crazy amount of movement, and that's obviously too much because it's spreading it out into little speckles. Interesting, but not what we want, and it actually slows down the simulation quite a bit. If we try 5, you can see we get a pretty cool breakup of the fire and the smoke. Now I am looking straight down here. If I look at it from the side, you can see that I've actually got quite a bit of rise here. Okay. I don't want this because I don't want that movement. And I also don't want to see that pop. If you see the sphere as the amount of smoke dies away, I don't want that. So I'm looking at it from the top here, and I'm letting the fireball kind of come right at you. And that'll help to give it like a from the center swirling out kind of look. Okay. So let's try 3.5 and let's see if we get something here. Now part of the reason that I'm getting a little bit more of a oblong shape, which again I am quite pleased with, is because of the rotation that I gave it on this animation here. The other thing I should note is that I did extend the amount of fuel that I'm getting. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is match that and rotate another 180, so it's a full 360 rotation, so maybe I get a little bit more coverage. We'll see what that looks like. But just looking at this, you can see my diameter goes up a little bit over the course of these frames. You can see at frame 15 it gets up to 25. My fuel amount is at 100, and then it's still at 100 at 2 because I didn't want it to start dying down right away. So just 2 frames of continuous flame, and then it dies down to 0 at frame 15. Okay, this pretty much, this sphere that's controlling the rotation pretty much just spins about 360. It's not a full 360, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so there's that. I also animated the noise here. You can see that I start with a large scale at the start, and that serves to give me these let me come in here. Oh, you know what, I think let me do this. Sorry, I don't know how much that was missed, but yeah, I don't think I missed too much there. Let me just not hide my slider here. Okay, in the beginning the scale is really large and it's got quite a bit of detail, and that serves to give me these large chunky breakoffs, okay, where you can see kind of a bigger sphere there goes off, and then it scales down so that it doesn't continue to break up in that fashion. It actually makes it a little bit more spotty there, okay, and that's something that I actually want. I also lower the amount of detail to make up for the fact that it is scaling down insanely. Frames here, just explain this real quick. If this was like at 10, it would go to 10 frames maintaining this particular phase of the noise, and then at frame 10 it would swap the phase. Putting it to frame 1 means it swaps the phase every frame. As you can see, the noise is switching around, and that just breaks things up. So you want your frames to be down. You want the noise to constantly be altering and changing the fields so that each frame it gets a different, piece of velocity added to it. Okay. Now my fire is dying out a little bit faster than I'd normally want, but that's okay because I do want to be left with quite a bit more smoke than fire. Because remember, in an explosion, the fire really isn't going to last as long as the smoke. So the other thing I changed was the burn rate starts off real low so that the fire maintains and then animates to about 10 here. So it's kind of ramping up, so the fire is not burning away in the beginning. It's maintaining, and then it's steadily burning away faster and faster and faster, because remember, my fuel is gone. I don't think I animated too much else or changed too much else. You can see here, gravity I put to 0.1 instead of 1. Vorticity I gave it a little bit of 0.01. Velocity damping gave a little bit, 0.01, not animated. The turbulence, that shows keyframes, but it's not animated. The amount of turbulence stays the same. I could probably actually animate that. Might help things a little bit, but don't want to go too crazy. Expansion I brought down to 1. Everything else pretty much you can see here. I am generating a smoke density of 10 here. So let's get into the rendering now. Let's just say we're happy with our shape. Again, you may not be happy with it, but it will serve to make quite an interesting particle effect in UDK. But then again, so would kind of anything. Now I'm also lagging, and that's just kind of something that's going to happen. The only way to really fix that would be to close max and restart it. It will maintain the cache, so you will still have your frames. Let's go ahead and shrink this down now. Now remember, okay, so for rendering, it's a little tricky because what I see here is not what I get. If I render this frame, you can see I don't have a totally white smoke. In actuality, the smoke's quite gray. So you can see that the color here is actually set to white. And you can see it's trying to use a gradient. Now if you right click on the color, you can go to keyless mode, and that actually switches it from a gradient to a color. And for smoke, we want a pretty dark smoke. Now if I render this, you can see that it's very, very dark. However, if I look at my alpha channel, I do have quite an okay breakup here. Now opacity, I think I animated that color. I did, so let me undo that. Okay, let's go off of auto key here. That's a important thing here, is to remember to get your auto key off, because that can actually mess you up. Okay, so yeah, no, I'm still animating that. Okay, I'm going to have to fix that in the curve editor. So I can come up here to curve editor and shrink that into view. And there's going to be, buoyancy is not there. I think it's under general details. Okay, here's the color. Let's just fit this and go ahead and delete those keys. Okay, now you can see that my smoke no longer animates its color. I also want to no longer show the update in the viewport, because that helps to lag things out too. So there's my smoke. Okay, so my opacity on my smoke, let's try something crazy. 60. And now when I render this, you can see that what I get is some actually really cool balls in the smoke. Now this is still a low res sim. But what you can do is your visual fall off, if I increase that, you can see here that I got quite a bit more detail in that. But if I make it lower, I can soften that some. That's too soft. Let's try 0.5, 0.8, let's try 0.8. We don't really see much difference here. And so you can see that it's this gray. I think there's a way to I forget how you clone this window. Okay, let me clone that. And let's turn this down to like 0.35 and render that. You can see it's quite a bit softer. Okay, so you have control over that, which is very cool. There's also shadow fall off, so if I say like 10, I'm not sure how much different that's going to be from say like 0.1. Doesn't really actually seem to have any kind of effect, so I have never played with that. But this right here has quite a dramatic effect on how cumulus, I guess, that it looks. So let's go with like a 30 or so, because we want our smoke to be pretty solid. Remember, we're controlling opacity with UDK. Okay, I think I do need a little bit opposite of the fall off, or whatever you want to call it. Let's try 3. Okay, I do want smoke like that. Now when it comes to the fire being mixed in with the smoke, you get a pretty cool effect like that, and that's really something that we want. Alright, the fire itself in the beginning, it's not going to look like this all pixelated, but it is going to look like a sphere. But what we would like to do is actually get this fire to be hotter in the beginning. So what we're going to do is we're going to auto key that, and we'll lock in these keys at frame 5. And to do that, you just plop the spinner up and then back down in both of these fields. Okay, let's put that back to 1. Okay, and then you'll see that this didn't actually get a key, but if I come off and go back on, that it now has a key. Now at the beginning, I want my color to be like 6. Now that's going to be really bright, and I actually want my opacity to be like 10. So I want like a really white burst that I can expand. Okay. This maybe not 10. This maybe like 2. And if we render that, you see it's pretty hot. Okay, and then when we get to about right here, it starts turning more into flame. Then the smoke comes in. Fire goes away. Let's see if we can't find the last frame of fire. Here, we can find that pretty easy by turning off the rendering of the smoke. So we still have fire here, but if we render the smoke, we kind of start losing it a little bit before the fire is actually gone. So like at frame 20 there, if I render without the smoke, you see I still have some fire there, and I'd like to see that. So what we're going to do is we're going to animate this opacity. And what we'll do is at this point we'll say it's about 20, and then it goes to 30 over the course of the end, and at the start let's just say it's like, I don't know, 10 or something like that. We'll see what we get. Let's hide. Oops. Let's hide this. So now at frame 20, let's see if we can actually see any smoke. Still not. So we need to lower this down. Let's say 10. Render. Still don't see it. Let's try actually 1 and render. And there's some fire in there. And then over the next couple of frames, the smoke will take over. Okay, but we're going to have more fire than smoke in the beginning. So just put that to 1. So it stays at 1. You can see here it's much less smoke. And then it'll start building in the smoke like that. Okay. Let's give our fire a little bit more of an interesting color. And we can do that by using key mode. And come here. And what we want here is a pretty rich orange. Okay. And then we want kind of like a cream color here. Looks like a peach. A little bit more yellow, a little bit more saturation, about like that. And then just after that, we want a pretty deep and dark red. And then at the end, oops, I added a key here. Just highlight that, hit delete. Ooh, no. Let's pop that back open. Right click, delete that. And at the end here, we want pretty much like a black. I'd say about 1. Okay, this is a decent color system. Now keep in mind here that I'm going to add like a crazy color at some point here. I'll just add some green. You'll notice that this goes from the inside. Let's clone that, make it sharper. This is just for illustration purposes. You can see that this is actually pretty much centered. The center is the right of the flame, the outside being over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete these, and delete these. Could add a little bit of blue to this color here. Obviously we don't want too much, but we could add just a hair of blue to the center of the fire, and that'll be pretty cool. Make it a little bit more magical like. The other thing we can do is, if we wanted to, we could key mode the smoke. You see it goes from white to white. Let's make it go from white to black. And let's make that transition a little earlier. Now you're not going to see a whole lot of change here, but you can see that it's a very weird gradient that's kind of frustrating to work with. To be honest with you, it's really frustrating to work with. Let's just go about like that. Let's give that a render. Let's clone that. And let's see the difference between dragging that all the way up. You can see we get like these sharp, nasty, swirly craps. So let's delete that, and let's just go pretty dark, and let's try to reverse this and see what we get. Alright, that's not looking too bad. Let me hide that. Yeah, like again, it looks pretty ugly in the viewport here, but it's going to look a lot better here in our rendering. And again, we're still at a low res sim. Now, I'm at an hour here, so I'm going to stop this part. And when I come back, we'll continue to update this just a little bit, and in the next part, we'll finalize everything. We need to add lights, get some shadows and things like that in there to make it look a lot more dynamic. We also need to mess with some global illumination, and we might take a stab at wavelet turbulence. That may or may not make it look better. It might make it look worse. It looks a lot better when you're doing like campfires, but it may not be good for something like a poofy explosion like we may want to see. Okay, so I'm stopping this.